My action research report. How can I maximize engagement for my students through the implementation of collaborative, concrete material experiences relevant to my learning intentions? This action research project had been implemented in a Stage 1 Year 1 classroom within Elderslie Public School. The goal of this investigation involved the implementation of the Motivation Engagement Framework, with a variety of experiences based heavily around the use of concrete materials. This goal aimed at maximizing student engagement whilst encouraging students to investigate approaches to the key learning areas of maths and English as they collaborate with peers using physical materials or objects. Opening in 2009, Elderslie Public School is located in the southwestern Sydney area and was established on the land of both the Gundungurra and Dharawal people. Currently, there are 520 students enrolled into Elderslie Public School, 110 of which are of Indigenous culture and English as a second language individuals. For my final practicum, I had been assigned to a Stage 1 Year 1 class known as 1S, holding a total of 24 students with varying academic skills and abilities. 4 of these students, of whom are of Aboriginal descent, and 3 speaking English as a second language. My mentor educator teaching this class is a well-trained and experienced teacher who has been teaching for a total of 13 years. She has taught stages 1, 2, and 3, holding a great knowledge of how each year learns. From the information I had gathered while learning about the students, the 3 English as a second language students were below the low level for English, the alert level, and only 1 had reached an intermediate level for maths. As the class aimed to reach appropriate level outcomes by the end of the year, 10 students by term 4 were still between low and alert levels of academic achievement. It was this information that helped to support my research focus, as I had made comparisons between student engagement during collaborative and individual tasks, and realized that those in the lower levels of academic achievement seemed happier and more motivated when working with others. During this final practicum, I'd observed that much of the learning taking place within the Year 1 classroom atmosphere of 1S is mostly guided by the educator for whole hour lessons, presenting little time for students to communicate and collaborate with one another. From what I understood, this eventually left students to feel lost when approaching their set maths and English tasks individually, due to the possible chance of them becoming confused after being split from collaborative investigations and the introductional visual guides. This was particularly evident to me through the beginning to end phases of lessons I had taught during my first block. Students would be asked to communicate briefly for a short period of time with those beside them using the think, pair, share method to talk about a topic being introduced, providing interesting answers and engaging learning conversations. However, when completing set tasks individually, students seemed less confident when speaking their answers and seemed to lose track of their thinking. The lack of discussion amongst peers at this point, I believe, cancelled out opportunity for class discussion, preventing ideas from being expressed through peer-to-peer communication. Originally, based off of my own observations during my first block, I believed the best approach for researching student engagement for this class of 1S would be to implement ICT as a major learning resource for engagement, a way of presenting constant visual guides and a more ease of access in terms of resources used to learn. However, after acknowledging my mentor's wishes to keep ICT away from the students, I eventually needed to reassess the classroom situation, brainstorming and observing lessons to influence my thoughts on what change could be implemented to promote further motivation and engagement in the class. During the first week of my practicum, my mentor had demonstrated to me her recent discovery of heightened student engagement through the use of their personal reckon racks, arithmetic racks for mathematics. As each student had an ease of access to their own rack, I noticed that students independently retrieving their own racks used as a visual guide helped to perform independent learning to enhance mathematical skills. At this moment, I had realized that perhaps by expanding the variety of concrete materials within the room, And combining these materials with collaborative tasks, student engagement and motivation could be dramatically heightened. Students could eventually make links between the learning conducted with peers and these materials in the classroom to resources and individuals outside of the classroom as well, if implemented correctly. It is my belief that my research focus in combination with the implementation of the MEE framework positively complements one another as the students are constantly providing each other with opportunities to learn. This is done via verbal communication and differing learning approaches to the collaborative concrete material experiences of which capitalized on high cognitive and operative development. It is through these collaborative experiences that the motivation, engagement framework presented itself through exploratory talk, as students shared their understanding, knowledge, and reasoning aloud as a group, motivating individual and group thought processes whilst constantly providing opportunities for all participating students to become engaged with one another and the tasks at hand. As my research focus had developed continuously over the time I spent investigating the outcomes of implemented collaborative tasks, I'd realized that students had become vastly more confident when communicating their thoughts and ideas in regard to the tasks at hand. Elements of the motivation, engagement framework were shown through these experiences as students were making comparisons between each other's ideas, encouraging engaging conversations between multiple students, and making connections between experiences both inside and outside of the schooling environment. This led me to believe that my students were on the path to creating an insider classroom, as their engagement and motivation to work together encouraged me to implement a wider variety of resources of which students could use to make connections both inside and outside of their classroom environment, helping them to realize that they are always learning and enhancing their abilities. My findings throughout my research had been based off of students within the class who were at varying levels of ability, emergent to standard to advanced. Working with these students supported my research as I wished to investigate how the collaborative tasks and use of concrete materials would spark discussions, motivation, and engagement between them, hopefully impacting the entire class overall. My other intention was to investigate how exploratory talk would proceed with these students based upon their personality traits and differing abilities, perhaps creating new ideas of approaching tasks in the process. I believed this data collection method was perfect for my investigation, as collaboration is a key to motivating students and provides a multitude of benefits to students confidently questioning classroom topics, in turn providing incredibly beneficial data. Consent forms were obtained after being signed by the school principal, my own mentor, along with parents and guardians of the students. Throughout this process, I'd collected multiple forms of data in order to evaluate the impact my learning tasks had on these students. As students had worked towards reaching their learning task goals, I'd observed and taken notes based upon peer-to-peer interaction in regard to their body language, whilst using concrete materials, reactions to their peers' ideas, and opinions along with how they had used the concrete materials provided. I'd also recorded the level of operative engagement displayed by the students, how they were effectively engaged with the task and the students they had worked with, along with the overall working chemistry between students and level of participation. As the tasks I set out were being completed, I had actively listened and recorded conversations of the participating students. My goal here was to pick up on the language and ideas implemented during student collaborative learning, gaining an understanding of how students were using the concrete materials and shared ideas between them. By critically reflecting on these interactions, I was able to delve into the evaluation process of how students were impacted by the task, along with how effective the collaborative learning was when comparing this to my first block before my research took place. By recording multiple records of conversation, I was able to compare the development over time between when my research was conducted to the end, noticing elements of both positive and negative experiences for the students. Taking photographs of student collaborative work was important, as it displayed to me the conversations and ideas of students put into action. From the learning conversations and observations recorded, I am able to make links to their learning shown in the photographs, allowing me to assess their current level of cognitive and operative engagement. From what I can see and evaluate based on these images, the students involved in my research from low to high levels are on the path to achieving most Year 1 outcomes by the end of the year. This also supports my understanding of how the students can gain a learning advantage by using concrete materials over abstract and representational methods. Without overburdening the Year 1 students of 1S with too much reflection on assessment after tasks, I provided the students with faces representing moods in order to represent how they felt about the completed tasks. This was a method implemented in order to still have students become actively involved in the evaluation of their demonstrated ability, along with whether or not they believe they could improve, however, does not cause them to stress. I personally believe this method was a good starting point for students to understand how they can express their current state of mind in regards to their work, and I believe it helped to provide me with information on where students were at in terms of their thinking and my overall teaching. I will now outline my key findings based on the data collected and annotated. I've chosen 3 experiences with evidence collected in order to extensively explain the elements of student engagement of which I observed. Beginning with the work samples on the right, we can see how the students worked collaboratively in order to investigate a problem involving skip counting through cutout image strips. These students stayed in their respected groups as they worked together to achieve outcome MA1, 6, and A, counting by 2s, 5s, and 10s, skip counting from 0. We can see through the images how effective the collaboration was as students pointed out the next steps to take to solve the problem with the concrete materials, showing effective communication and highly effective engagement. This demonstrates that students valued their learning by implementing collaborative effort and constantly providing each other with verbal support. Through the learning conversation, we can see the effective communication made by the students throughout the experience. I have added my observations showing that students had supported engagement through questioning, displayed emotive language whilst discussing mathematical ideas, communicated problems, and acknowledging mistakes. These observations and learning conversations demonstrate that students have met outcomes EN1 1A, showing turn-taking, questioning, and using comments to expand on ideas. The self-assessment here was simple. However, it allowed the students to have a voice on their own learning. According to the faces, the students were ultimately happy with their task, leading me to believe the collaborative concrete material activity was a success in regard to supporting student engagement, and that they were confident in themselves whilst investigating the task as a group. During this experience, we can see through the work sample images that the students displayed communication both verbally and non-verbally in order to support group effort during the mathematics experience. Students attempted to make a total of 10 and 20 using playing cards and helped one another to find the correct numbered cards. Due to their collaborative investigation, students met outcome MA1, 5, and A, as they together used concrete materials to model addition problems involving 1 and 2-digit numbers. As the students had achieved this outcome together, I believe the collaboration element of the experience highly supported their learning. Throughout the learning conversations and my observations, it can be seen how students had shown high cognitive engagement through high order thinking, being able to demonstrate what they know using the concrete materials provided. The effectiveness of the MEE framework was evident here through collaborative exploratory talk, as the students discussed the task by eliminating any confusion some students may have had, questioned one another to challenge thinking, along with making links to outside of classroom experiences. The students also displayed emotive language, showing enjoyment that the collaboration had brought, and acknowledged this enjoyment by mentioning the great teamwork implemented throughout the activity. The self-assessment showed that students were once again pleased with the activity. However, one student had coloured in the "I understand a little" face. This demonstrated to me that this self-assessment method was effective in showing me how the students really felt they went with the activity. It also showed me that perhaps my teaching strategy of modeling was not explicit enough for this particular student. So I will work towards improving this aspect. Once again, on the right we see the work sample evidence of students attempting addition problems through 2-die and blocks as concrete materials. This supports their addition skills along with number recognition. Students met outcome MA15NA by using concrete materials to model addition problems, along with recognizing, recalling, and recording combinations of two numbers that add to 10. From this experience, I believe I noticed a shift in conversation and collaborative efforts, which I believe was important to include in this research. In the work samples, we see the students performing the activity together. However, in the learning conversation and my observations, we see students becoming disengaged, then once again engaged. Students began by demonstrating questioning to support student engagement. However, due to some statements made by one student, the other began to feel distant and disengaged, possibly due to tense conversation, as I noticed a lower tone of voice, less confidence in communicating their learning, and scanning the room for other individuals. However, after student A also seemed to notice this disengagement, they once again started to support engagement by encouraging others to display their learning, causing student B to once again become interested and carrying on with the activity. The self-assessment completed by the students shows that the students felt confident in the activity they had performed. However, I believe if there was an assessment conducted to show their feelings on the collaboration for this activity, the middle phase would be coloured in instead. From this section of the research, I've considered that collaboration is not constantly going to engage students. However, depending on how communication is implemented, the collaboration with support of concrete materials could either be a great success on student learning or a progressive experience that can be built upon over time. To conclude my research, I believe that a stronger focus on implementing collaborative concrete material experiences is a most beneficial path to heightening student engagement whilst meeting learning outcomes. The conversations voiced between students and their actions with the resources present a thorough exploration of learning through varying ideas shared and the motivation to approach tasks due to collaborative support. This collaborative learning helps students by learning to investigate problems whilst being accompanied by others, along with improving their own knowledge through taking feedback and listening intently to others who hold differing knowledge and experience. This therefore encourages students to engage in learning outside of the classroom environment, making educational links to the world around them due to the number of concrete materials present to them, encouraging the idea that learning is constant and shared. As an upcoming educator, my conducted investigation has insightfully bestowed upon me a heightened sense of duty to help students by supporting their reach of both outcomes and approaches to future learning. Starting by introducing the importance and effective use of concrete materials via collaborative work shows that concrete methods are valuable both now and in the future approaches to learning. My short-term goal may involve researching extensive methods of implementing this collaborative work as a whole class learning experience, leading into my long-term goal of spreading this type of educational approach to students in higher years, continuing the trend of its importance and value in education. My experience through implementing this research project has shown me how valuable conducted investigations can be when combined with the MEE framework approach. I am able to more thoroughly evaluate student academic progress, educational engagement, and carry out pedagogical practices more confidently as a future educator.